The wind in 1878 did not merely blow across the Texas panhandle. It hunted. It scoured the earth, tearing at the roots of the buffalo grass and stripping the paint from the weather-beaten sidings of Cedar Ledger. It was a hot, dry breath that carried the taste of grit and the copper tang of a storm that refused to break. For the residents of Cedar Ledger, the wind was a constant conversation partner, a nagging voice that reminded them of their thirst. The town sat on the jagged edge between civilization and the burned grass territory, a cluster of timber and adobe clinging to the earth like a tick on a longhorn's hide. It was a place that survived on cattle, a lonely stagecoach station, and the trading post that served as the beating heart of a dying body. Eliza May Hart stood before the cracked mirror in the small, rented room above the livery stable, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her bonnet. She was 27 years old, though her eyes held the exhaustion of a woman twice that age. The room smelled of old hay and horse sweat, but it was better than the open prairie. She took a breath and looked at her reflection. The right side of her face was pleasant enough, with a soft jawline and an eye the color of wet moss. But the left side was a map of survival. Years ago, a lye accident in a laundry house had done its work. The skin was pulled tight, shiny and rippled like melted wax that had hardened too quickly. It dragged the corner of her lip down into a permanent, ghostly grimace and narrowed her left eye to a slit. The children in the last town had screamed when they saw her. The men had just looked away, which was worse. "Courage, Eliza," she whispered to the empty room. Her voice was steady. Even if her hands were not, she needed work. Her coin purse was light, holding less than $3 to her name. She picked up her canvas bag. It was a heavy, awkward thing made of rough material, stained with the dust of 100 miles. She never let it out of her sight. It contained her few clothes, her sewing kit, and at the very bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, a heavy ledger she had stolen from a desk she should never have been near. That book was the reason she was running, and it was the reason she could never truly rest. Eliza stepped out into the blinding afternoon sun. Cedar Ledger was busy, despite the heat. Cowboys with dust-caked bandanas over their faces rode slow circles around the corral, while women in faded calico hurried from the shade of one awning to another. As Eliza walked toward the trading post, the invisible wall of the town's judgment rose to meet her. "There she is," a voice hissed from the porch of the general store. Eliza kept her head down, the bonnet's brim acting as a blinder, but she could feel the eyes. They felt like ants crawling on her skin. "Mother says she's cursed," a child's voice piped up, loud and clear. "Says that face is what happens when the devil kisses you goodnight. Hush now, Toby," a woman scolded, though her tone lacked any real bite. It was Mrs. Gable, the baker's wife. Eliza knew that tone. It was the sound of polite cruelty. "Don't stare at the ugly woman. It's not polite to look at mistakes." Eliza's grip on her canvas bag tightened until her knuckles turned white. Ugly. The word was a stone they threw with casual precision. She walked faster, the dust swirling around her skirts. She was not a mistake. She was a survivor. But in a town desperate for rain and money, they didn't need a survivor. They needed someone to blame for the bad luck hanging over the valley. She pushed open the heavy wooden door of the trading post, the bell above it jangling a harsh announcement of her arrival. The interior was dim and smelled of cured tobacco, coffee beans, and raw leather. At the counter stood the proprietor, a balding man with sweat stains mapping continents on his shirt, and a young boy, Toby, the one who had spoken outside stacking tins of peaches. "I told you yesterday, Miss Hart," the proprietor said without looking up from his inventory list. "We don't need no help. I can do more than scrub floors." "Mr. Henderson," Eliza said, her voice firm. She placed her hands on the counter, keeping the scarred side of her face turned slightly away. "I'm a seamstress. I can mend saddles, stitch canvas, fix the torn coats of the drovers. I'm fast, and I'm cheap." Mr. Henderson looked up then. His eyes flickered over her face, a mixture of pity and revulsion. "It ain't about the skill, ma'am. It's the atmosphere. Folks come here to relax, have a drink, buy their flour. They don't want to be staring at—" He waved a vague hand toward her face. At that, Eliza felt the heat rise in her cheeks, hotter than the Texas sun. "My hands work the same as any beauty queen's. Mr. Henderson. And your face scares the horses." A deep, smooth voice boomed from the back of the store. Eliza froze. The air in the room seemed to change, growing heavy and charged. Silas Crow stepped out of the shadows of the back office. He was a tall man, dressed in a suit that cost more than the entire inventory of the store. His vest was silk, his watch chain gold, and his boots were polished to a shine that defied the dust of the territory. He was the owner of the largest cattle herd in the county and the man who controlled the freight wagons moving north. He was also the man whose name was on several pages of the ledger currently weighing down Eliza's bag. Crow didn't know that. Of course, to him, she was just a drifter. He walked to the counter, moving with the lazy confidence of a predator that knows it has no natural enemies. "Mr. Crow," Henderson stammered, straightening up. Crow ignored the shopkeeper and turned his gaze to Eliza. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were like polished flint, hard, cold, and assessing. "You're disrupting the peace, darling," Crow said. "This town has enough troubles without a witch walking its streets." "I am looking for work, not trouble," Eliza said, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had to get out of here. Being this close to him was like standing next to a loaded cannon. "Work," Crow laughed, a dry, humorless sound. He reached into his pocket and flicked a silver dollar onto the counter. It spun and settled with a ring. "Here, take that and buy a veil. A thick one. That's the best work you can do for Cedar Ledger." Toby giggled from behind a stack of flour sacks. Eliza looked at the coin. It represented 3 meals. It represented survival, but it also represented a surrender she wasn't willing to make. She looked up at Crow, meeting his gaze with her good eye. "I earn my keep, Mr. Crow," she said softly. "I don't take charity for my face." She turned and walked out, the silence of the room following her like a hound. Outside. She leaned against the rough wood of the building, gasping for air. The wind whipped at her skirts. She couldn't stay here. The hostility was growing. If Crow decided she was a nuisance, she would disappear. And if he ever found out she had the ledger from the stagecoach station, she needed to move. There was a rumor of a ranch 20 miles west that needed a cook for the shearing season. It was isolated, far from the prying eyes of the town. As she gathered herself, a shadow moved on the ridge overlooking the town. Kiyu sat motionless on his paint horse, blending so perfectly with the scrub brush and the limestone that a casual observer would have missed him entirely. He was a Comanche scout, a man who walked the razor's edge between the fading world of his ancestors and the encroaching iron world of the white man. He was not looking at the town. He was looking at the dust cloud to the south, through his brass spyglass. He watched a wagon train moving slowly, but his attention shifted to the loading dock behind the trading post. He saw men loading crates, long, narrow crates that were too heavy to be farming tools. Rifles, Kiyu thought. New thundersticks. He lowered the glass. His face was broad and stoic, painted with a single stripe of ochre across the cheekbone. He wore buckskins that had seen seasons of rain and blood, and a necklace of silver and bone. He was here to keep the peace, but the white men seemed determined to set the world on fire. Silas Crow was feeding the hatred. Kiyu knew this. He had seen the guns moving into the hands of renegade bands, creating chaos that Crow would then use as an excuse to call for the army to clear the land. Kiyu's eyes drifted to the street below. He saw the woman in the bonnet exit the trading post. He saw the way she slumped against the wall, small and defeated. He couldn't see her face, only the posture of a creature that has been kicked once too often. He felt a strange, fleeting kinship. He, too, was unwelcome on those streets. To them, she was a monster because of her face. To them, he was a monster because of his blood. He turned his horse away from the town. The wind was changing. A storm was coming, not just the dust, but something darker. Eliza made her decision. She found a freighter named Old Man Miller who was taking a load of supplies out toward the western settlements that evening. He was half blind and didn't care much about her face as long as she could pay the fare. $1.50, Miller had grunted, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. We leave at 4 o'clock. Don't be late. It took half her savings. By late afternoon, the sky had turned a bruised purple. The wind had picked up, screaming through the gaps in the buildings. Eliza climbed onto the back of the wagon, wedging herself between barrels of salted pork and crates of nails. She pulled her shawl tight around her shoulders. As the wagon lurched forward, leaving Cedar Ledger behind, she saw Sheriff Mason Reed standing on the porch of his office. He looked tired, his hand resting on his gun belt. He watched the wagon go, then turned his gaze toward the darkening horizon. Even the law looked helpless against the coming night. Eliza clutched her canvas bag to her chest. She felt the hard edges of the ledger through the fabric. It was her insurance, but it was also a target on her back. Just get to the ranch, she told herself. Just get somewhere where they don't know my name. The wagon creaked and groaned, the wheels grinding against the rocky trail. The town of Cedar Ledger shrank behind them, disappearing into the haze of dust and heat. Eliza didn't know that she was riding straight into the path of a violence she had spent her whole life trying to outrun. She didn't know that the wind was not pushing her away, but guiding her toward the very thing she feared and the only person who would ever see her clearly. The first crack of thunder rolled across the plains, sounding like a cannon shot. The horses pinned their ears back. Eliza closed her eyes and endured. It was all she knew how to do. The storm had not just passed, it had ravaged. The world was a landscape of sepia and gray, the horizon erased by a lingering haze of suspended grit. The road, which had been a clear artery leading west only hours before, was now buried under drifts of silt that looked like brown snow. Eliza May Hart lay half buried in the lee of the overturned wagon. Her ears rang with a high, thin whine that drowned out the wind. She pushed herself up, coughing up dust that tasted of copper and despair. Her hands scrambled frantically in the dirt until her fingers brushed the coarse texture of the canvas bag. She yanked it close, curling her body around it as if it were a child. Old Man Miller was gone. The horses were gone. The traces had been cut, not broken. She tried to stand, but her legs were water. She collapsed back against the splintered wood of the wagon wheel, staring at the desolation. She was 20 miles from nowhere, with a face that frightened children and a book that could get her killed. A pebble skittered down the slope nearby. Eliza froze. She reached into her boot for the small knife she kept there, her hands shaking. A horse stepped into view. It was a paint, its coat dusted with the same powder that covered the earth. On its back sat a man who looked as if he had been carved from the sandstone of the canyon. Caillou did not look at her. Not at first. He slid from his horse with a fluid, silent motion, his moccasins making no sound on the hard-packed earth. He walked past her, ignoring the knife she held with trembling defiance. He knelt by the rutted earth where the wagon wheels had slewed sideways. He picked something up. Eliza watched him, her breath caught in her throat. He was Comanche. She knew enough of the territory to recognize the stripe of paint on his cheek and the way he wore his hair. In Cedar Ledger, they told stories of the Comanche that would make a grown man lock his doors. But this man did not look like a monster. He looked like a man reading a newspaper. He turned the object over in his fingers. It was a brass shell casing. He smelled it, then looked at the ground again. He brushed the dirt away from a patch of dark, coagulated oil that had leaked from a smashed crate. "Not a storm," he said. His English was clear, accented but precise. The wind finished it, but men started it. He finally turned to look at her. Eliza braced herself for the recoil. She turned her head slightly, offering him the good side. But she knew it was futile. The scar was a map no one could ignore. But Caillou did not flinch. He did not grimace. His dark eyes swept over her face with the same detached, analytical intensity he had used on the shell casing. He was looking at the bruising on her temple, the dust in her hair, the way she favored her left arm. He was assessing damage, not aesthetics. "You are hurt," he stated. "I am fine," Eliza snapped, the lie coming out sharper than she intended. She tried to stand again and swayed. Kiyu stepped forward, not to catch her, but to steady the wagon wheel she was leaning on. "The driver, gone," she whispered. I think he ran when the shooting started. Then the dust came." Kiyu nodded once. "He is dead. The horses are miles away. You cannot stay here." "I have nowhere to go," she said. She clutched the bag tighter. "I just need... If you could just point me to a shelter, just for one night. I can pay..." She fumbled for her coin purse, but he raised a hand to stop her. "Keep your mettle," he said. "Night is coming. The coyotes will be here soon. And the men who left these shells," he pointed to the brass casing, "they did not find what they were looking for." His eyes dropped to the canvas bag in her arms. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. He knew, or he guessed. "Come," he said. He did not offer her a hand, respecting a boundary she hadn't realized she had set. He led his horse, and she followed, stumbling over the uneven ground. They walked for an hour, navigating a labyrinth of dry washes until they reached a limestone overhang tucked into the side of a mesa. There was a trickle of water here, gathered in a natural stone basin. Kiyu built a fire. It was small, a smokeless flame fed by dry sage roots. He broke a piece of hardtack in half and offered it to her. Eliza took it, her fingers brushing his. His skin was warm and rough. "Eat," he said. She ate, the dry biscuit turning to paste in her mouth. The firelight danced on the walls of the cave. She watched him across the flames. He was cleaning his rifle, his movements efficient and practiced. "Why?" she asked suddenly. He looked up. "Why what? Why did you help me? You saw me. You saw my face." She touched the scarred skin reflexively. "Most men, they look away, or they stare like I am a circus freak." Q looked at her, really looked at her. He looked at the scar, at the twisted lip, and then into her eyes. "The wolf does not care if the rabbit is ugly," he said. "The storm does not care. Death does not care." He paused, wiping the barrel of the rifle with a rag. "You survived the fire once. I see the mark. Now you survived the storm. That is what matters." The knot in Eliza's chest, a knot that had been there for 5 years, loosened slightly. He didn't think she was pretty. He thought she was strong. That was something she hadn't heard in a long time. "It wasn't just a fire," she said, the words spilling out before she could check them. I was working at the stage station at Pine Ridge before I came here." Kiyu stopped cleaning the gun. He waited. "I was cleaning the office," she continued, her voice trembling. "I saw papers, a ledger, Silas Crow. He isn't just moving cattle. He is moving crates labeled as farm equipment, but they are heavy, too heavy." She tapped the canvas bag. "I took the book. I thought if I had it, I could trade it for safety. But then I saw his men kill a stable boy who asked too many questions. So I ran..." "Crow." Kiyu said the name like a curse. "He sells the thundersticks to the young men of my tribe. He tells them to fight, so the army will come and clear the land for his cows." He looked at the bag with new interest. "That book, it proves this. It has dates, payments, signatures," Eliza said. Kiyu stood up. He paced to the mouth of the cave and looked out at the darkening prairie. "If you run, he will hunt you. He has many eyes. The only way to stop a snake is to cut off its head." He turned back to her. "We go back." "Back?" Eliza gasped. "To Cedar Ledger, that is suicide." "No," Kiyu said. "It is the only place with a lawman who might listen. Sheriff Reed is a heavy man, but he is not a bad man. If we give him the paper, Crow falls. And if he doesn't listen, then I will protect you." Kiyu said it was a simple statement, devoid of bravado. The next morning, the ride back to Cedar Ledger was a gauntlet of nerves. Eliza sat behind Kiyu on the paint horse, her hands gripping the waist of his buckskin shirt. She could feel the tension in his muscles. They crested the ridge overlooking the town at noon. Cedar Ledger looked peaceful from a distance, but as they rode closer, the atmosphere shifted. There were too many people on the street. A group of men stood near the blacksmiths, holding rifles. A wagon had been overturned in the street, a different wagon, and voices were raised in anger. "Rumors," Kiyu murmured. "Crow has been busy. He tells them the Comanche are raiding." They rode down the main street. The silence that fell over the town was instant and suffocating. All eyes turned to them. A Comanche warrior, armed and painted, riding into town with a white woman clinging to his back. It was an image that confirmed every nightmare the townspeople had been fed. Kiyu stopped the horse in front of the sheriff's office. He helped Eliza down. Her legs were stiff, and she stumbled slightly. A group of women were gathered on the boardwalk outside the mercantile. Among them was Mrs. Gable, the baker's wife who had shushed her son the day before. Mrs. Gable stepped forward, her face twisted in a sneer that mirrored the ugliness she claimed to see in Eliza. "Well, Mrs. Gable said, her voice loud enough to carry across the dusty street. "I always said like attracts like." She pointed a finger at Eliza, then at Kiyu. "Look at them," she announced to the gathering crowd. "The monster found a beast. Truly, it is a match made in hell, an ugly face for a savage soul." Laughter rippled through the crowd. It was nervous, cruel laughter. Eliza felt the shame burn her cheeks, hotter than the scar tissue ever could. She looked down at her boots, wishing the earth would open up and swallow her. But then she felt a presence beside her. Kiyu did not move toward the women. He did not reach for his weapon. He simply stood there, solid and unmovable, placing his body between Eliza and the jeers of the town. "Go inside," he said to her, his voice low. "Find the sheriff. I will wait." Eliza looked up at him. His face was impassive, but his eyes were blazing with a cold, hard fire. He was taking the heat of their hatred so she could move. Clutching the canvas bag against her chest, Eliza turned her scarred face toward the sheriff's door. She would not cry. Not here, not in front of them. She pushed the door open, leaving the only man who had ever called her a survivor standing alone in the street. The sheriff had allowed Eliza to stay, but permission was not the same as welcome. Mason Reed had looked at the ledger she offered, his face unreadable behind a thick mustache, and simply told her to keep her head down while he looked into things. He had not taken the book. He claimed he had no safe in the office that could hold a secret better than her own canvas bag. So, Eliza kept the bag, and she went to work. Cedar Ledger was a town that ran on dust and debt, but there was always dirt to be scrubbed. Mr. Henderson at the trading post had begrudgingly allowed her to return, not because he had developed a conscience, but because his wife was down with the ague and the floorboards were turning gray with mud. 75 cents a day, Henderson grunted, not looking her in the eye. "And you stay in the back when customers of quality come in. I don't want you souring the milk." It was a pittance less than half of what a man would make for easier work, but Eliza nodded. "I will need soap, Mr. Henderson, and hot water." For the next 3 days, Eliza became a ghost in the trading post. She scrubbed the floors until her knuckles were raw and red. She hauled buckets of water from the pump, the weight of them straining her back, her left leg dragging slightly with fatigue. She mended torn sacks of flour and stitched up the canvas awnings that the wind had shredded. She worked with her head bowed, the bonnet pulled low to hide the left side of her face, but she could not hide from the whispers. "That's her," a woman whispered near the fabric bolt rack. "The one who came in with the Indian. Doesn't look like she has a husband. Living on the road like a stray dog. Unnatural," another replied. "A face like that. It is a warning from God. I say, a woman without beauty is like a well without water. Useless." Eliza scrubbed harder, the bristles of the brush scratching against the wood like the sound of her own teeth grinding together. She wanted to scream that she was more than a face, that she could read and write and sew a seam straighter than any of them. But she swallowed the anger. Anger did not buy bread. Around 2 o'clock on the third day, the bell above the door chimed with a heavy, confident ring. Silas Crow walked in. The atmosphere in the store shifted instantly. Men straightened their posture. Women touched their hair. Crow moved through the aisles like a king visiting his subjects, nodding benevolently to the very people he was slowly bankrupting with his freight fees. Eliza was on her knees near the pickle barrel, scrubbing a stubborn stain. She froze, hoping to blend into the shadows. Crow stopped. He looked down at her. His boots were polished, the leather gleaming despite the dusty street outside. "Miss Hart," Crow said. His voice was smooth, like whiskey poured over gravel. "Scrubbing floors, I would have thought a woman with your history would aim higher." Eliza sat back on her heels, clutching the scrub brush. She did not look up at his face, but at his waistcoat buttons. "Honest work is high enough for me, Mr. Crow." "Is it?" He crouched down, an intimate gesture that made Eliza's skin crawl. The scent of expensive bay rum cologne washed over her, masking the smell of lye soap. "You hold on to that canvas bag of yours very tightly, Eliza, even when you are working. It must contain something very precious. Family heirlooms, love letters." He reached out a hand, as if to brush a stray lock of hair from her forehead. Eliza flinched back violently. Her hand went to the bag strapped across her chest. "Just personal effects, sir," she said, her voice tight. Crow's eyes narrowed. For a second, the mask of the benevolent businessman slipped, revealing the shark beneath. He stared at the bag, his gaze heavy and calculating. He knew. He didn't have proof yet, but he smelled blood in the water. "Careful, darling," he whispered. "The prairie is full of accidents. It would be a shame if you lost more than just your looks." He stood up abruptly, a bright, fake smile plastering itself back onto his face as he turned to greet the mayor. Eliza remained on the floor, shivering despite the heat of the afternoon. Outside the town limits, the tension was different but no less sharp. Kiyu had made camp near a cluster of cottonwood trees by the dry creek bed. He was not allowed within the town proper after sunset, a rule Sheriff Reed enforced with an apologetic shrug, so he watched from the perimeter. He sat cross-legged, whittling a piece of ash wood. To the townspeople, he was a lurking threat, a savage waiting to scalp them in their beds. Mothers pulled their children inside when they saw his silhouette against the sunset. Only one person crossed the invisible line between the town and the trees. Teal Moreno walked up the path, her skirts kicking up little puffs of dust. She was a woman of 30, with skin the color of polished walnut and eyes that missed nothing. She worked as a translator for the cattle buyers, living in the space between the white world, the Mexican laborers, and the tribes. "You are making them nervous." "Kiyu," Teal said, stopping a few feet away. She spoke in English, though she knew he spoke the Comanche tongue. She wanted anyone listening to understand. "Good," Kiyu said, not looking up from his carving. "Nervous men are careful men." "Nervous men are trigger-happy men," Teal corrected. She sat on a flat rock nearby. "Crow is stirring the pot. He is telling people you are a scout for a war party. He says you are signaling them with mirrors." Kiyu snorted. "I am signaling no one. I am waiting." "For the woman?" Teal asked. Kiyu paused, the knife stilled in his hand. "She has something Crow wants. If I leave, she dies. If she dies, the proof against Crow dies. And if Crow lives, my people die." "Is it only about the proof?" Teal asked softly. Kiyu looked at the town, his eyes finding the roof of the trading post. "She carries a heavy burden. The wind does not help her carry it. I will be the windbreak." Teal nodded slowly. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small pouch of tobacco. "Then you will need eyes inside. I cannot fight with a knife. Warrior. But I hear things. The sheriff is being pressured. The town council is meeting tonight. Crow is going to push for an expulsion order." "Let them push," Kiyu said. "I am not a stone to be rolled away." Back at the trading post, the afternoon dragged on. A young boy, no older than 7, was sitting on a crate while his mother haggled over the price of sugar. The boy was tugging at a tear in his shirt sleeve, making it worse. Eliza watched him. She hesitated, then reached into her pocket for her small sewing kit. She couldn't help herself. A torn seam was something she could fix. It was one of the few things in the world she had control over. "Come here," she whispered to the boy. He looked at her, his eyes widening at the sight of her scar. But curiosity won out. He stepped closer. "I can fix that," Eliza said. She threaded a needle with practiced speed. "Hold still." Her fingers flew. In less than 2 minutes, the tear was closed with tiny, invisible stitches. It was masterwork. "There," she said, biting the thread. The boy touched the sleeve, amazed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a piece of hard candy, offering it to her. "Get away from her." The boy's mother swooped down like a hawk. She grabbed the boy by the arm, yanking him back so hard he nearly fell. "Don't you go near that woman! Billy!" the mother hissed, glaring at Eliza with a mixture of fear and disgust. "You want to catch what she has? You want to look like a monster?" I fixed his shirt," Eliza stammered, holding up the needle. "We don't want your help," the woman spat. She threw a copper penny on the floor at Eliza's feet. "We pay for service. We don't take favors from the cursed." Eliza looked at the penny. It lay in the dust she had just scrubbed. She felt the tears pricking at her eyes, the hot, humiliating tears of the helpless. But she did not cry. She picked up the penny. It was money. She needed money. "Thank you, ma'am," she said, her voice hollow. The woman huffed and dragged the child away. Eliza went back to the floor, her heart feeling like a bruised fruit in her chest. Then the trouble started. "My watch," a voice shouted. It was a drover, a man employed by Silas Crow. "My gold pocket watch, it was right here on the counter." The store went silent. Mr. Henderson came rushing out. "Are you sure, sir?" "I put it down to count my coin," the drover shouted, pointing a thick finger at Eliza. "Then she came by with her bucket. Now it's gone." "I didn't touch it," Eliza said, standing up. Panic rose in her throat. "I swear." "Search her," someone yelled. "Search the bag." Crow's voice drifted from the back of the room. He wasn't shouting. He was merely suggesting, helpful and poisonous. 2 men grabbed Eliza. She screamed as they tore the canvas bag from her shoulder. "No, please," she cried. If they opened it, if they found the ledger, the door of the trading post opened. It wasn't a slam, but the sudden draft of air made everyone turn. Kiyu stood in the doorway. He held no weapon, but his presence filled the room. "Stop," he said. "Get out of here. Indian." The drover snarled. "This is town business." Kiyu walked forward. The crowd parted instinctively. He did not look at Eliza. He looked at the floor. He crouched down near the counter where the drover had been standing. "Mud," Kiyu said. He pointed to a faint, reddish smear on the floorboards. "Red clay, from the riverbank." He stood up and followed the trail of red clay with his eyes. It led away from the counter, not toward Eliza's bucket, but toward the back door. "The man who took the watch has red clay on his boots," Kiyu said calmly. "This woman has gray dust on her knees. Look at the boots of the man behind the door." Everyone turned. Hiding behind the frame of the back storage room was another one of Crow's ranch hands. He tried to shrink back, but the sheriff, who had just entered, grabbed him. "Let's see the boots." "Jimmy!" Sheriff Reed grunted. The boots were caked in red clay. And in Jimmy's pocket, the sheriff found the gold watch. The tension in the room broke, replaced by grumbling and awkward shuffling. "It was a mistake," the drover muttered, grabbing his watch and hurrying out. "Mr. Henderson looked at Eliza. He didn't apologize. He just pointed to the bucket. "Water's getting cold. Miss Hart." Kiyu waited until the crowd dispersed. He walked over to Eliza. She was trembling, clutching the returned bag so hard her fingers were white. "You are shaking," he said. "They almost took it," she whispered. "They almost saw." "But they did not," Kiyu said. "Come, you are done for today." He let her out. This time, no one stopped them. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the street. They walked to the edge of town, to the sanctuary of the cottonwoods where Kiyu had his fire. It was a breach of protocol. She was a white woman. He was a Comanche man, but Eliza was too shaken to care about propriety, and Kiyu did not care about white men's rules. They sat by the small fire as the stars began to puncture the twilight. "I am useless," Eliza said suddenly, breaking the silence. She was staring into the flames. "I scrub floors and get accused of thieving. I try to sew a shirt and get treated like a leper. I should just give you the book and leave." Kiyu poked the fire with a stick. "You sew well. I saw the boy's arm. It was a good stitch." "It doesn't matter," she said bitterly. She touched her face. "This is all they see. I am not a woman to them. I am a cautionary tale. I stopped being a woman the day the live ad exploded. The fire took my face, and it took my future." She looked at him, her eyes wet. "Who could ever look at this and see a wife, a mother? I'm just meat that survived the cooking." Kiyu was silent for a long time. The night sounds of the prairie, the crickets, the distant howl of a coyote filled the space between them. "My wife," Kiyu said, his voice low and rough, "was beautiful. She had hair like the raven's wing." Eliza held her breath. It was the first time he had spoken of his past. "She did not die by fire." Kiyu continued. "She died because a man sold a rifle to a drunkard. The gun misfired. The bullet went through the wall of our lodge. It was an accident. They said—" He threw the stick into the fire. The sparks flew up, swirling into the darkness. "I do not hate the white man for being white," Kiyu said, looking at Eliza. "I hate the men who sell death in wooden crates. I hate the metal that turns men into cowards who kill from a distance." He turned to her. The firelight softened the angles of his face. "You say the fire took your womanhood," he said. "I say the fire burned away the husk. What is left is iron. Iron is not soft. Iron is not pretty. But iron holds the roof up when the storm comes. Do not apologize for being iron." "Eliza." Eliza looked at him. For a moment, the shame that had been her constant companion for 5 years receded. He didn't offer pity. He offered respect. "Thank you," she whispered. "Rest," he said. "Tomorrow, the sheriff will come. Crow is smiling too much." "When the snake smiles, he is ready to strike." Eliza lay down on the blanket he offered, but sleep did not come. Her mind was racing. She opened the canvas bag. Using the light of the dying fire, she pulled out the ledger. She had looked at it 100 times. But tonight, something Kiyu said about crates and metal stuck in her mind. She turned the pages to the entries from 3 months ago. There, in the column for farm implements, was a recurring symbol next to the shipments for Silas Crow. It was a small triangle with a line through it. Eliza gasped softly. She had seen that symbol today. When she was scrubbing the floor in the back room of the trading post, she had seen a crate tucked away in the corner, half hidden under a tarp. It bore the same triangle, and the crate had been cracked open just enough to reveal the dull glint of oiled steel. It wasn't just that Crow was importing guns. He was storing them right here, in the heart of the town, under Henderson's nose. Eliza closed the book. Her hands were cold, but her heart was pounding with a terrifying clarity. She wasn't just holding a book. She was holding a lit match, and she was standing in the middle of a town built of dry straw. "Kiyu," she whispered into the dark, but the scout was already asleep, or pretending to be. Eliza looked at the town lights flickering in the distance. Crow was out there, planning his war, but he didn't know that the ugly washerwoman he had mocked had just found the key to his destruction. She tucked the book back into the bag. Tomorrow, she would not be a victim. Tomorrow, she would be iron. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving Cedar Ledger in a bath of bruised purple light. The wind had died down, which was often a warning in this part of the country. Silence on the prairie usually meant the sky was holding its breath before a scream. And Eliza May Hart stepped out of the back door of the trading post, her shoulders aching from a day of scrubbing and lifting. She adjusted her shawl, clutching the canvas bag tight against her ribs. The weight of the ledger inside felt heavier with each passing hour, a stone tablet dragging her down. She turned the corner into the narrow alley that ran behind the livery stable, intending to take the shortcut to her room. A shadow detached itself from the wall. Eliza gasped and stepped back, her boots splashing in a puddle of stagnant water. Silas Crow stood there. He was not smiling this time. The veneer of the charming businessman had evaporated, leaving something cold and reptilian in its place. He blocked the exit of the alley, his silhouette cut sharp against the fading light. "You are a hard woman to pin down, Miss Hart," Crow said. His voice was low, devoid of the theatrical boom he used in the store. It was the voice of a man discussing the price of cattle. "I am going home, Mr. Crow," Eliza said, her voice trembling but her chin lifted. She angled her face so the scar was in the shadow, a reflex she could not break. "Home," Crow repeated, taking a step closer. The smell of expensive tobacco and bay rum assaulted her senses, clashing with the smell of horse manure from the stable. "You have no home. You have a rented room and a bag that does not belong to you." He stopped 2 feet from her. He did not raise his hand. He did not need to. The threat was in his stillness. "I know what is in the bag, Eliza," he said softly. "And I know you are smart enough to know what happens to people who steal from me. But I am a civilized man. I do not wish to hurt a woman, even one as unfortunate as you." He extended a hand, palm open. "Give me the ledger," he hissed. "Give it to me. Walk away, and never come back to Cedar Ledger. I will even give you $10 for the stagecoach." Eliza gripped the bag until her fingers turned white. If she gave it to him, she lost her only leverage. If she gave it to him, the guns would keep flowing, and more people would die. "I don't know what you are talking about," she lied. Crow's eyes hardened. "Do not play games with me. You are ugly, Eliza, but do not be stupid too." He reached for her. Eliza reacted on instinct. She did not scream. She swung the heavy canvas bag with all her might. The corner of the ledger struck Crow's wrist with a sickening crack. Crow shouted, more in surprise than pain, and stumbled back. Eliza ran. She did not run toward the main street where the lights were. She ran into the deepening dark behind the buildings, her skirts tangling around her legs. She heard Crow shouting for his men, his voice echoing off the wooden walls. "Get her! Don't let her leave town!" Panic clawed at her throat. She scrambled over a pile of discarded crates, tearing her dress. She could hear heavy boots pounding the dirt behind her. 2 men, maybe 3. She turned a corner near the blacksmith's forge and collided with a solid wall of buckskin and muscle. She opened her mouth to scream, but a large, rough hand clamped over it. "Quiet," a voice whispered in her ear. It was Kiyu. He smelled of sage smoke and rain. He did not ask questions. He pulled her into the deep shadow of the forge's overhang just as 2 of Crow's hands ran past, their pistols drawn. "Over there," one of them shouted, pointing toward the open prairie. "I saw her skirts. They ran off into the dark." Kiyu removed his hand from her mouth. "You hit the snake," he stated. It wasn't a question. "He knows," Eliza gasped, her chest heaving. "He knows I have the book. Then the town is a trap," Kiyu said. He took the canvas bag from her, slinging it over his own shoulder as if it weighed nothing. "We cannot go to your room. We cannot go to my camp. They will look there first." "Where?" Eliza asked, looking around wildly. "The old rail line," Kiyu said. "Move! Step where I step." He led her away from the town, moving with a crouched, predatory grace. They did not run. Running made noise. They moved quickly and deliberately, sticking to the patches of darkness between the moonlight. They crossed the dry creek bed, the stones shifting silently under Kiyu's moccasins. Eliza struggled to keep up, her boots loud and clumsy by comparison. But Kiyu kept a hand on her arm, guiding her, balancing her. The sky finally broke. It started with a low rumble that shook the ground, followed by a crack of lightning that illuminated the prairie in stark, blue-white relief. Then the rain came. It did not sprinkle. It fell in sheets, cold and violent. driven by a sudden gale that dropped the temperature by 20 degrees. In minutes. "Faster!" Kiyu urged. They scrambled up a muddy embankment toward the skeleton of the abandoned railroad project. It was a ghost of an industry that had failed 2 years prior. There, flapping wildly in the wind, was a canvas surveyor's tent that had been left behind to rot. Kiyu shoved Eliza inside and followed, lacing the flap shut against the storm. The interior was pitch black and freezing. The canvas snapped and popped like gunshots under the assault of the wind. Rain sprayed through the worn seams, creating a mist that chilled them to the bone. Eliza sank to the ground, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the shock of the cold and the terror of the chase. She hugged her knees, shivering so hard her body convulsed. Kiyu moved in the dark. He found a dry spot in the center of the tent where the canvas still held. He spread out a wool blanket he had carried in his bedroll. "Sit here," he ordered. Eliza crawled onto the blanket. She was soaked through. Her cheap calico dress clung to her skin like ice. I can't stop shaking," she stammered. Kiyu sat beside her. He was wet too, his buckskins heavy with water. He reached out and touched her arm. His hand was warm, impossibly warm. "The cold kills faster than the bullet," he said. He pulled the edges of the blanket up, wrapping it around both of them. It was intimate. It was necessary. They sat huddled together in the dark, the storm raging outside like a beast trying to tear the tent apart. Eliza could feel the heat radiating from his chest, the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then, a flash of lightning lit up the tent, casting harsh shadows. Eliza instinctively turned her face away, burying the scarred side into her shoulder. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't what?" Kiyu asked. His voice was right by her ear, deep and rumbling. "Don't look," she said. The shame was a reflex, as deep-seated as the shivering. "I am hideous. In this light, I look like a monster." She felt Kiyu shift. He did not pull away. Instead, his hand moved up. His fingers, rough with calluses, touched her jaw. He gently turned her face toward him. "Look at me, Eliza," he said. She squeezed her eyes shut. "No. Who would want to look at this? Even I can't look at it. It is cursed. Ugly." "Open your eyes." It was a command, but soft. Eliza opened them. In the dim grayness, she saw his face close to hers. He was not looking at the tent flap. He was looking at her. His thumb brushed the raised, shiny skin of the burn scar on her cheek. It was not a clinical touch. It was a caress. "You speak the words of the town," Kiyu said. "They are small people with small eyes. They see a scar and they stop looking. I see the woman who walked 20 miles in a dust storm. I see the woman who struck a wolf with a bag of paper." He traced the line of her jaw, his touch sending a jolt of heat through her that had nothing to do with the blanket. "You ask who would want to look," Kiyu murmured. "I am looking, and I do not see a monster." Eliza's breath hitched. You are just being kind." "I am Comanche," he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "We are not known for kindness. We are known for truth. And the truth is, the man who only sees beauty is blind. He misses the treasure." The word hung in the air. Treasure. Eliza looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the strength in his jaw, the sorrow in his eyes, and the fierce protection that radiated from him. For the first time in 5 years, since the fire had taken her face, she did not feel like a victim. She felt seen. She felt wanted. The air between them changed. The cold seemed to vanish. Kiyu leaned in closer. His forehead rested against hers. Their breath mingled, warm and moist in the freezing air. Eliza's hand moved up, trembling, and rested on his chest, over his heart. She could feel it beating, strong and steady. "Eliza," he whispered. He did not kiss her. Not yet. He simply held her there, in the space before the kiss, where the longing is sharpest. He pulled the blanket tighter around them, his arm strong around her waist, anchoring her to the earth. She leaned into him, her defenses crumbling. She let herself be held. She let herself be a woman. Not a scar. In the darkness of the storm, with the wind howling like a banshee, she found a peace she had never known in the silence of the town. Suddenly, Kiyu stiffened. His hand moved instantly to her mouth, silencing a gasp. "Listen," he breathed. Through the roar of the rain, Eliza heard it, the squelch of hooves on mud, the jingle of a bridle. "Check the tracks by the ridge," a voice shouted. It was muffled by the wind. But close, too close, Crow's men. Kiyu moved with terrifying speed. He pushed Eliza flat against the ground, pulling the blanket over her to camouflage her shape. He laid his body over hers, shielding her completely. He was a human wall of muscle and buckskin. Eliza lay still, her face pressed into the dirt floor. She could feel the weight of him, heavy and protective. She could feel the tension in his muscles as he reached for the knife at his belt. The horse walked past the tent. Eliza held her breath until her lungs burned. The rider paused. "Nothing here," the voice shouted. "Just this old ragwind's gonna tear it down by morning. Keep moving," another voice yelled from further away. "Check the canyon." The hoofbeats faded, swallowed by the storm. Kiyu did not move for a long time. He waited until the only sound was the rain. Then, slowly, he eased his weight off her, though he kept his arm draped over her back. "They are gone," he whispered. Eliza turned over, looking up at him in the dark. "You stayed," she said softly. "You covered me." "I told you," Kiyu said, brushing a strand of wet hair from her forehead. "I am the windbreak." They slept fitfully, entangled in the blanket and each other, waking every time the wind changed direction. But Eliza did not dream of fires. She dreamed of a pair of dark eyes that saw her whole. Morning brought a cold, gray light and a break in the rain. The prairie smelled of wet sage and ozone. They walked back to town as the sun began to burn off the mist. They did not sneak in this time. They walked side by side. Eliza's dress was ruined, mud-stained and torn, and her hair was wild. Kiyu looked dangerous, his face set in stone. Sheriff Mason Reed was waiting on the porch of his office, his arms crossed. Silas Crow stood beside him, looking fresh and impeccably dressed, a stark contrast to the two bedraggled figures approaching. A small crowd had gathered. They always did. "Well," Crow said loudly as they approached, "look who decided to return. The thief and her accomplice." "I am no thief," Eliza said, her voice raspy but loud. She gripped the canvas bag. "Sheriff," Crow said, turning to Reed, "I told you, she stole a ledger from my office, a private book containing my business accounts, and it seems she ran off into the night to share her spoils with the savage." The crowd murmured. The narrative had been set. Eliza was a thief, and worse, a loose woman who consorted with the enemy. "That is a lie," Eliza said, stepping forward. "This book proves you are a criminal." Crow interrupted smoothly. "Sheriff, arrest her, and run him out of town before he scalps us all." Sheriff Reed looked uncomfortable. He shifted his weight. "Now, Silas, let's hear them out." "Hear what?" Crow snapped. "Look at them. She spent the night in the dirt with him. Do you think they were discussing theology? She is a woman of low moral character. Mason. Everyone knows it. That scar on her face is just the mark of the sin inside." The cruelty of the words hit Eliza like a slap. The townspeople stared, their eyes judging, their whispers like venom. Ugly. Whore. Thief. Kiyu stepped forward, his hand drifting to his knife. "Watch your tongue, white man." Crow smirked. He wanted Kiyu to draw. He wanted an excuse. Suddenly, a scream shattered the tension. "Help, oh God! Someone help him!" It was Mrs. Gable. She was running from the alleyway, her face pale as milk. She was carrying her son, Toby, in her arms. The boy was blue in the face. He was making a terrible, high-pitched rasping sound, fighting for every breath. His chest heaved, but no air seemed to be getting in. "He can't breathe, Mrs." Gable screamed, falling to her knees in the mud. "He's choking the croup. It's the croup." The crowd froze. The croup was a death sentence in a town without a doctor. Dr. Miller had died of whiskey and old age 6 months ago. The nearest physician was in Amarillo, 2 days' ride away. "Get whiskey," someone shouted. "Turn him upside down," another yelled. "No," Eliza shouted. Her voice cut through the panic. She dropped the canvas bag. She forgot Crow. She forgot the shame. She saw a child dying. She ran to Mrs. "Gable, give him to me." "Get away, you monster, Mrs." Gable shrieked, clutching the boy tighter. "He is dying." Eliza grabbed Mrs. Gable's shoulders and shook her. "His throat is closing up. I can save him. I know what to do." Ruth Pike, the old midwife, hobbled out of the crowd. She looked at the boy, then at Eliza. "Let her take him. Martha," Ruth barked. "The girl knows I've seen her work." "Mrs." Gable hesitated, sobbing. Toby's eyes were rolling back in his head. Eliza didn't wait. She snatched the boy from his mother's arms. He was heavy, flailing weakly. "Kiyu," Eliza shouted. "The blacksmith's. I need hot water. Lots of it." "And a tent." Kiyu moved instantly. He didn't ask why. He ran to the blacksmith's forge, grabbing a bucket and kicking the coals of the forge into life. Eliza carried the boy into the open shed of the blacksmith. "I need a blanket. Someone bring me eucalyptus oil if you have it, or mint now." She sat on a bench, holding Toby upright. "Breathe, Toby. Look at me. Breathe." Kiyu returned with a bucket of steaming water. He didn't just set it down. He understood what she needed. He grabbed a heavy tarp from the corner and threw it over Eliza and the boy, creating a makeshift steam tent. "Stay with me," Eliza commanded the boy. Inside the dark, hot enclosure, the steam rose thick and suffocating. Eliza held the boy's face over the bucket, careful not to burn him. "Breathe the steam," she whispered, rubbing his back firmly. "Come on, Toby." Outside, the town held its breath. The only sound was the crackle of the forge and the weeping of Mrs. Gable. Kiyu stood guard at the entrance of the shed, his arms crossed. He stared at Crow, daring him to interfere. Crow looked annoyed, his grand accusation interrupted by a domestic tragedy. Minutes dragged like hours. Inside the tent, Eliza was sweating. Her scar throbbed in the heat, but she didn't stop. She hummed a low tune, the same one her mother had hummed to her. "That's it," she whispered as she heard the boy's breathing change. The high-pitched whistle loosened. A wet, rattling cough broke from his chest. Toby coughed violently. Once, twice, and then took a deep, shuddering breath of air. Eliza threw back the tarp. She emerged, soaked in sweat and steam, her hair plastered to her skull. In her lap, Toby was pink-faced and breathing. He was crying, a loud, healthy wail. "He's all right," Eliza said, her voice cracking. "Mrs." Gable rushed forward, falling to her knees and burying her face in her son's chest. "Oh, thank God! Thank God!" She looked up at Eliza. For the first time, she didn't look at the scar. She looked at the eyes. "You, Mrs." Gable stammered. "You saved him." Ruth Pike stepped forward and placed a hand on Eliza's shoulder. "Good work, girl. Quick thinking." The crowd was silent. They looked at Eliza, the ugly woman, the thief, and they saw the child alive in her arms. The narrative Crow had spun was fraying at the edges. A monster didn't save children. A thief didn't drop her prize to help a dying boy. She knows healing," a man murmured. "Maybe she ain't cursed," another whispered. Silas Crow watched the scene, his jaw tightening. He saw the shift. He saw the sympathy growing in the eyes of the sheep he intended to shear. If the town embraced her, they would listen to her. And if they listened to her, they would look in that bag. He turned to his foreman, a man named Jack with a missing ear. "This changes nothing?" Crow whispered, barely moving his lips. "The sentiment won't last. We need to remind them of fear." "What do we do, boss?" Jack asked. Crow looked at the wooden buildings of the town, dry as tinder after the brief rain had evaporated. He looked at the wind picking up again. "Fire," Crow whispered. "Tonight, we give them a real tragedy, and we make sure the Indian takes the blame." Crow plastered a fake smile on his face and stepped forward toward the blacksmith's shed. "A miracle," he proclaimed loudly, though his eyes were dead. "Truly a miracle, but let us not forget. Sheriff, the law is the law. We still have the matter of the stolen property." Sheriff Reed looked at Eliza, who was wiping soot from Toby's face. He looked at Kiyu, who was standing beside her like a sentinel. "Let the woman rest. Silas." Reed grunted. "We will sort the paperwork tomorrow." Crow nodded. A gracious defeat. "As you say, Sheriff, tomorrow." But his eyes promised that tomorrow would never come. Not for Eliza. Not for the town. Eliza stood up, her legs shaking. She looked at Kiyu. He gave her a barely perceptible nod of pride. She had won the battle for the boy's life, but she knew the war for the town was just beginning. And tonight, the air smelled less like rain and more like smoke waiting to happen. The night was not quiet. The wind had returned, dragging its belly across the dry grass of the plains. But beneath the whistling of the air, there was a deeper, more sinister sound. It was the sound of a town holding its breath, waiting for a spark. Eliza May Hart sat by the window of the small room the sheriff had allowed her to occupy at the back of the jailhouse. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. She had not slept. The canvas bag sat on her lap, her hands tracing the rough texture of the fabric. Tomorrow. Sheriff Reed had promised a formal inquiry. He would look at the ledger. He would question Silas Crow. It sounded like justice. But Eliza knew the West better than that. Justice here was often decided by who could draw the fastest or who could buy the most rounds at the saloon. Suddenly, a sound shattered the night. It was high, shrill, and terrifying. A horse screaming. Eliza bolted to her feet, through the window. She saw a flicker of orange light reflecting off the low clouds. It was not the sunrise. It was to the north, near the edge of town. "Fire!" a voice bellowed from the street. "The livery! The livery is burning!" Eliza grabbed the bag and ran out. The sheriff was already awake, pulling on his boots, his face pale in the gloom. "Stay here," Reed commanded. "My evidence is in that fire," Eliza shouted back, ignoring him. She pushed past him into the street. Cedar Ledger had turned into a vision of hell. The livery stable, a massive structure of dry timber and hay, was a torch against the black sky. Flames roared upward, twisting in the wind, sending showers of sparks raining down onto the roofs of the nearby houses. Men were running with buckets, shouting orders that were swallowed by the roar of the blaze. But it was the horses that made the blood run cold. They were trapped inside, kicking against the stall doors, their panic vibrating through the ground. "Get the doors open!" someone screamed. Eliza ran toward the heat. She saw figures moving in the smoke, men with handkerchiefs over their faces, wielding axes. Then she saw Silas Crow. He stood on top of a water trough, elevated above the chaos. He looked immaculate, his white shirt glowing in the firelight. He was pointing, not at the fire, but at the darkness beyond the town. "It is a raid!" Crow shouted, his voice cutting through the panic. "I saw them Comanches. They set the fire to distract us while they steal the stock." The crowd, already terrified and fueled by weeks of rumors, snapped. The fear turned instantly to rage. "The Indian!" a man yelled. "The scout, he is behind this!" "And the witch," Crow added, pointing a finger straight at Eliza, who had just stumbled into the light. "She is the signal she brought him here." 2 of Crow's men lunged at Eliza. She tried to dodge, but the crowd was too thick. Rough hands grabbed her arms, twisting them behind her back. The canvas bag was ripped from her shoulder, but she lunged and bit the hand that held it, reclaiming it with a desperate strength. "I didn't do this!" Eliza screamed. "Let me go!" They dragged her toward the center of the street, away from the fire, but into the heart of the mob. The heat was intense, singing her eyebrows. "Look at her!" Crow shouted, jumping down and striding toward her. "Look at the face of the traitor. Do you see it? That is the face of a demon who burns honest men's livelihoods." The crowd surged forward. These were the people whose children Eliza had wanted to sew for, whose clothes she had washed, but fear had stripped away their humanity. "Ugly wretch," a woman spat. Burn her like she burned the barn, a man roared. Cursed! Eliza fell to her knees in the dust. The insults were physical blows. They struck the old wounds of her soul. She looked up, her scarred face illuminated by the fire of the burning stable. She saw only hatred. She saw the reflection of her own deformity in their eyes, twisted and amplified by their terror. Please, she whispered, but her voice was lost. Crow loomed over her. He reached down and grabbed a handful of her hair, forcing her head back. You should have taken the money, darling, he hissed in her ear, low enough that only she could hear. Then he raised his voice for the crowd. We must protect our town. If the sheriff won't act, we must. Let her go. The voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that cut through the hysteria like a knife through canvas. The crowd parted. Kiyu walked into the circle of light. He was alone. He held his rifle in one hand, but the barrel was pointed at the ground. He did not run. He did not shout. He walked with the terrifying calm of a man who has already accepted death. Teal Moreno was running behind him, breathless. She positioned herself between the crowd and the scout, her hands raised. He wants to talk, Teal shouted. Listen to him. Kill him, a voice shouted from the back. Kiyu stopped 10 feet from Crow and Eliza. He looked at the men holding Eliza. He did not blink. The sheer intensity of his gaze made the men falter, their grip loosening slightly. You burn your own horses, Kiyu said, his voice clear. And you blame the wind. You set this fire, savage, Crow yelled. We saw the signals. Crow looked at the crowd, sensing he needed to break the scout's presence before the mob lost its nerve. He looked down at Eliza, who was trembling in the dirt, her face streaked with soot and tears. Crow sneered. He gestured to Eliza's face with a theatrical wave of his hand. Why would we listen to you? Crow laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. You, who consorts with this thing. Look at her. She is hideous. She is so ugly that even the dogs avoid her in the street. She is trash, Indian, worthless trash. The silence that followed was heavy. The fire crackled and popped. Eliza squeezed her eyes shut. She wanted to die. She wanted the fire to take her. She had never felt so small, so utterly devoid of value. Kiyu handed his rifle to Teal. He stepped forward, his hands empty. He walked past the guns, past the anger, until he stood directly in front of Eliza. He looked down at her. Then he looked at Crow. Finally, he turned his gaze to the town of Cedar Ledger. His eyes were dark obsidian, reflecting the flames. You see a scar, Kiyu said. His voice was a low growl that vibrated in the chests of those standing near. You see skin that is different. You are blind. He reached down and took Eliza's hand. He pulled her to her feet. She stood unsteadily, refusing to look up. Kiyu placed a hand under her chin and lifted her face until she was forced to look at him. He did not care about the fire. He did not care about the guns. She is not trash, Kiyu said. He paused, ensuring every soul in the town heard him. She is my greatest treasure. The words hung in the smoky air. Eliza gasped. A sob broke from her throat, raw and agonizing. For 20 years, she had been the ugly girl, the cursed woman, the mistake. And now, in the middle of an inferno, a warrior had claimed her as his prize. It was a coronation. She looked at him through her tears, and she saw that he meant it. He wasn't saving her. He was valuing her. Crow's face twisted in fury. He had lost the emotional leverage. The crowd was wavering. They were confused by this display of dignity in the face of their hate. Enough, Crow screamed. Kill them both, Crow's foreman. Jack raised his pistol. Bang! The shot went wide, kicking up dirt at Kiyu's feet, because Sheriff Mason Reed had stepped forward and knocked Jack's arm upward. That is enough, Reed bellowed. He had his revolver drawn now. No one shoots. You side with them. Mason? Crow shouted, his eyes bulging. You are a traitor too. I am the law, Reed roared back. And the law says we don't lynch people because you say so? Then to hell with the law, Crow signaled to his men. It happened fast. 3 of Crow's hired guns raised their weapons. Kiyu moved. He did not reach for a weapon. He became one. He shoved Eliza behind the water trough and launched himself at the nearest gunman. It was a blur of motion, a wrist lock, a crack of bone, and the man was on the ground. Teal Moreno threw herself behind a barrel. Sheriff Reed fired 2 shots into the air to scatter the crowd, then leveled his gun at Crow. "Stop it!" Eliza screamed. She stood up from behind the trough. The fighting paused for a heartbeat. She fumbled with the canvas bag, ripping the oilcloth open. "Stop!" she yelled again. "I have the proof it is here." She held the ledger up high. The firelight illuminated the leather cover. "Crow isn't moving cattle," Eliza shouted, her voice gaining strength from the adrenaline. "He is moving guns. He is selling rifles to the renegades to start a war so he can buy your land cheap." "Lies?" Crow shrieked. "She is lying. Look at the fire." Eliza pointed to the burning stable. "Look at the smoke. It is black, thick, oily black smoke. Hay burns gray, grain burns white. That is oil burning gun oil." She opened the ledger to a marked page. Here shipment date August 12th. 20 crates, marked with a triangle and a line. I saw the crates in the back of the trading post. I saw his men moving them tonight before the fire started. The crowd turned to look at the fire. Eliza was right. The smoke billowing from the back of the stable was thick, clotted, and pitch black. And amidst the smell of burning wood, there was the distinct, acrid stench of boiling grease and oil. "I saw it too," a small voice piped up from the edge of the crowd. It was Toby. The boy was wrapped in a blanket, standing next to his mother. "Mrs. Gable." "Toby, hush!" "Mrs." Gable whispered, but she didn't stop him. "I saw them," Toby shouted, pointing at Jack, Crow's foreman. "I was looking for my cat. I saw Mr. Jack pouring barrels of stuff on the hay. It smelled like the lamp oil." The truth hit the crowd like a bucket of cold water. A child's testimony was the one thing that could pierce the hysteria. Crow looked around. The mob was no longer a mob. They were a group of neighbors realizing they had been played. They lowered their pitchforks. They looked at the fire they were supposed to be fighting. "You tried to burn us out," the blacksmith rumbled, stepping forward with his hammer. Crow realized the game was up. His mask of civilization shattered completely. He spun around and backhanded Teal Moreno, who had been standing too close. Teal cried out and fell. "Move and I kill her," Crow shouted. Pulling a small Derringer pistol from his vest pocket, he grabbed Teal by the hair, using her as a shield. "Let her go, Silas," Sheriff Reed said, his aim steady. "Get me a horse," Crow screamed. "I want a fresh horse, now." Q was 10 yards away. He looked at Crow holding the woman. He looked at Eliza. Eliza nodded. She understood. She reached into the canvas bag and pulled out the only other thing she carried, a heavy, iron-tailor's shear. "Crow!" Eliza shouted. Crow turned his head instinctively toward her. In that split second, Q threw his knife. He did not throw to kill. He threw to disarm. The heavy blade spun through the air and struck Crow's hand, not the one holding the gun, but the one gripping Teal's hair. The blade bit deep into his forearm. Crow screamed and let go of Teal. Teal dropped to the ground and rolled away. Crow fired his pistol wildly, the bullet hitting the dirt. He turned and scrambled toward a saddled horse tied to the hitching post. He hauled himself into the saddle, kicking the beast furiously. "He's getting away," someone shouted. Crow galloped down the main street, heading for the open dark. Sheriff Reed raised his Colt, but he hesitated. The shot was long, and there were people in the way. Q did not hesitate. He picked up a lasso rope that had been dropped by a stable hand. He swung it once, twice, the loop widening with a snap. He ran 3 steps and let it fly. The rope hissed through the air. It didn't catch Crow. It caught the rear leg of the horse. The rope went taut. Q dug his heels into the dirt and wrapped the end around the post of the water trough. The horse jerked to a violent halt. Silas Crow was launched from the saddle like a rag doll. He flew through the air and landed face first in the mud of the street with a bone-shattering thud. He groaned, trying to push himself up, but Sheriff Reed was there. The sheriff placed a heavy boot on Crow's back and pressed the cold barrel of his gun against the man's neck. "Silas Crow," Reed said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "You are under arrest." The fire still roared behind them, but the violence had ended. The crowd stood in absolute silence. The only sound was the crackling of timber and the heavy breathing of the men. They looked at Crow, broken and muddy. Then they looked at Eliza. She stood by the water trough. The ledger clutched to her chest. Her face was illuminated by the firelight, the scar, the soot, the tears. But she did not look down. She looked back at them. Kiyu walked over to her. He did not care about the crowd. He stood beside her, his presence a silent wall against the world. "Mrs." Gable was the first to move. She walked forward, holding Toby's hand. She stopped in front of Eliza. She looked at the scar. Then she looked at the ledger. And finally, at Eliza's eyes. Mrs. Gable started, but the words failed her. She simply nodded, a jerky, shameful motion, and stepped back. It was not an apology. Not yet, but it was an admission. They had been wrong. Eliza felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Kiyu. "The fire is still burning," he said softly. "But the wind has changed." Eliza looked up at him. "You called me a treasure." "I do not lie," Kiyu said. Eliza May Hart took a deep breath. The air smelled of smoke, but for the first time in her life, it also smelled of freedom. She was not the ugly girl in the corner anymore. She was the woman who had burned down the lies of Cedar Ledger. The smoke hung over Cedar Ledger for 3 days. It was not the choking, black smoke of the oil fire that had consumed the stable, but a thin, gray haze that smelled of wet ash and regret. The town was quiet, moving with the slow, aching rhythm of a body recovering from a fever. Eliza May Hart stood in the center of what used to be the livery yard. Her hands were black with soot. She had spent the last 10 hours hauling charred timber alongside the men who, only days before, had watched her walk down the street with scorn. She paused, wiping her brow with the back of her wrist. A heavy beam lay at her feet, still warm to the touch. "Let me get that, Miss Hart." Eliza looked up. It was the blacksmith, a man named Thomas, whose face was as broad as his anvil. He did not look her in the eye, focusing instead on the timber. He lifted the heavy beam as if it were a twig and tossed it onto the pile of debris. "Thank you, Mr. Thomas," Eliza said quietly. "Don't mention it," he grunted, turning away quickly. "Just don't be lifting the heavy stuff. You did enough the other night." It was a kindness, clumsy and rough, but a kindness nonetheless. Yet, it did not settle the turmoil in Eliza's chest. She looked at the blackened skeleton of the stable. She looked at the scorched siding of the mercantile next door. If I had not come here, she thought, the guilt gnawing at her like a rat, none of this would have burned. The horses would be alive. The town would be peaceful. She felt a presence at her shoulder. She did not need to turn to know who it was. The scent of rain and sage was her anchor now. The wood was dry, Kiyu said. His voice was low, meant only for her. If the lightning did not strike, a stray spark would have... You did not light the match. Eliza, I brought the man who did, she whispered. I brought the war to their doorstep. Crow was already here. Kiyu corrected her. He was a rot in the floorboards. You just pulled up the rug so they could see it. Eliza looked at him. Kiyu looked tired. There were dark circles under his obsidian eyes, and his buckskins were stained with the same soot that covered her dress. He was staying near the town, defying the unspoken laws of the territory. But the tension was palpable. Every time he walked down the street, hands drifted to gun belts. Not out of aggression anymore, but out of a deep-seated, instinctive wariness. He was a Comanche warrior standing in a town of white settlers. He had saved them, yes, but gratitude has a short memory when fear is in the blood. You should go, Eliza said, her heart aching as she spoke the words. The sheriff has Crow in chains. The danger is over. If you stay, they will only tolerate you for so long. Kiyu looked at the horizon, where the prairie met the sky in a seamless line of blue, and leave you to scrub their floors and eat their pity. I am used to it, she said, lifting her chin. I am not. Kiyu replied, I will not leave until the council speaks. I want to see the snake defanged before I holster my knife. The hearing took place the following afternoon in the town hall, which doubled as the church on Sundays. It was a stiflingly hot room, filled with the smell of unwashed bodies and sawdust. Sheriff Mason Reed sat at the front table, acting as the preliminary magistrate until the circuit judge could arrive from Amarillo. Silas Crow sat on a stool to the left, his hands manacled, his expensive suit ruined by mud and dried blood. He looked smaller without his entourage, his face pale and drawn. Eliza sat in the front row. She wore her best dress, which she had mended the night before. She did not wear a bonnet. She let the light from the window fall on her face, scar and all. Kiyu stood at the back of the room, near the door. He would not sit. He stood like a sentinel, his arms crossed. Silas Crow, Sheriff Reed began, his voice gravelly. You are held for the arson of the livery stable, the attempted murder of Miss Teal Moreno, and the illegal trafficking of firearms to incite violence in the territory. Crow scoffed, though his voice lacked its usual oil. This is a farce, Mason. You are taking the word of a thief and a savage over a businessman who built this town. We are taking the word of the evidence, Reed said, slapping his hand onto the ledger that sat on the table. This book details every gun, every bullet, and every dollar you took to spill blood. It is forged, Crow spat. She wrote it. Look at her. She is desperate for attention. She would burn the world down just to have someone look at her without vomiting. The insult hung in the air. A week ago, the town would have nodded. A week ago, they would have laughed. But today, the room was silent. Then, a chair scraped against the floor. Ruth Pike, the elderly midwife who had lived in Cedar Ledger since the first stake was driven into the ground, stood up. She leaned heavily on her cane. Sit down, Silas, Mrs., Pike said. Her voice was thin but sharp as a needle. You speak of vomit. I helped birth half the men in this room. I have seen blood and mess. And the only thing making me sick right now is you. She turned to the room. That girl. She pointed a gnarled finger at Eliza. Saved the Gable boy when the rest of you were running around like headless chickens. She breathed steam into his lungs while you were shouting about monsters. If that is what a monster does, then we need more of them. Amen. Mrs., Gable whispered from the second row, clutching Toby to her side. And another thing, the blacksmith spoke up from the back. Crow's men, they were the ones pouring the oil. I found the barrels behind the shop, stamped with his mark. He tried to burn my livelihood to hide his dirt. Sheriff Reed looked at Crow. It seems the town has spoken. Silas, you will be held here until the marshal arrives to transport you to the territorial prison, and I suggest you pray the judge is in a better mood than I am. Reed stood up and looked at Eliza. He took off his hat, twisting the brim in his large hands. Miss Hart, Reed said. The room went quiet. I owe you an apology. I listened to the wind instead of looking at the facts. I let a good woman be treated like a criminal because it was easier than facing the truth. I am sorry. Eliza felt a lump rise in her throat. It was not a victory parade. It was quiet, somber, and real. Thank you, Sheriff, she said softly. The meeting adjourned, and 2 deputies hauled a protesting Crow out the back door. As the townspeople filed out, many of them glanced at Eliza. They did not smile warmly. Change is slow, and awkwardness is heavy, but they nodded. They acknowledged her. She was no longer a ghost or a curse. She was a neighbor. That evening, Eliza stood before the small mirror in her room. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow that softened the edges of the furniture. She looked at her reflection. The scar was still there. The lie had melted the skin, pulling her left eye down, twisting her lip. It was red and shiny and undeniable. No magic had erased it. No hero's kiss had turned her into a princess. She touched the skin with her fingertips. It was numb in places, hypersensitive in others. You are still ugly, she whispered to the glass. But the voice in her head, the one that usually screamed in agreement, was silent. She looked at her eyes. They were the same moss-green eyes that had read the ledger. They were the eyes that had looked at a dying boy and known how to save him. They were the eyes that a Comanche warrior had looked into and found a treasure. "I am ugly," she corrected herself. "To those who do not know how to see," she turned away from the mirror. The definition of the word had not changed, but her ownership of it had. It was just skin. It was a map of what she had survived, not a limit on who she could be. She walked out of the boarding house and headed toward the edge of town, to the line of cottonwoods where the creek trickled. Kiyu was waiting for her. He was sitting on a fallen log, watching the water. Teal Moreno was standing nearby, smoking a thin cheroot. "He is gone," Teal said as Eliza approached. "The marshal took Crow an hour ago. He will hang, most likely, or rot in Yuma." "Good," Eliza said. Teal looked at Eliza, then at Kiyu. She smiled, a knowing, weary smile. "So, the dragon is slain. The town is safe. Now comes the hard part." "What is the hard part?" Eliza asked. "Living," Teal said. She dropped the butt of her cigar and crushed it with her boot heel. "You have freedom now, Eliza, but freedom in the West is not just doing what you please. It is carrying the weight of your choices. You chose to stay. You chose to fight. Now you must choose how to build." Teal looked at Kiyu. "And you, warrior, you stood between the white man and his fear. That buys you respect for a week, maybe a month. But do not think the line between your people and this town is erased. It is only drawn in pencil now, instead of ink." "I know the line," Kiyu said. "I have walked it all my life." Teal nodded. "Good luck to you both. I have a wagon to catch in the morning. I am heading south." She adjusted her hat. "You two, try not to start any more fires." She walked away, leaving them alone in the gathering dusk. Eliza sat on the log beside Kiyu. The space between them was charged, electric and warm. "Teal is right," Eliza said. "The town, they are grateful now. But how long until the next drought? How long until a calf goes missing and they look at you with suspicion again?" "I do not live for their suspicion," Kiyu said. "I live for my own truth." "And what is your truth?" Eliza asked. Kiyu turned to her. He took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. His hand was large, rough, and scarred from a life of hunting and fighting. "My truth," he said, "is that I am tired of walking alone. I am a scout. My job is to go ahead, to be alone in the dark, but I have found a place I want to rest." "Here?" Eliza asked, looking at the dusty town in the distance. "Not there," Kiyu said, gesturing to the buildings. "Here." He squeezed her hand. "With you." Eliza's breath hitched. "It will be hard. Kiyu, a white woman and a Comanche man. We will be outcasts in both worlds. Then we will build our own world," Kiyu said firmly. "We will build a cabin near the river, far enough from the town to breathe, close enough to trade. I will guide the wagons that pass through. Honest work. You will sow and heal. We will not hide. We will not hide," Eliza repeated, the words tasting like a vow. The sun finally slipped below the horizon, leaving them in a twilight of indigo and silver. The air cooled, but the heat between them grew. Kiyu shifted, turning his body fully toward her. He reached out and touched her bonnet strings. "May I?" he asked. Eliza nodded. He untied the bonnet and set it on the log. Her hair, loose and wavy, fell around her shoulders. He brushed it back, his hand lingering on her neck. Then his fingers moved to her face. Eliza stiffened instinctively as his thumb brushed the edge of the scar near her mouth. It was the place she hated most, the place where the skin pulled and made her look like she was sneering. "Relax," Kiyu whispered. He traced the ridges of the scar with a reverence that made Eliza's knees weak. He was not examining a wound, he was memorizing a landscape. "Does it hurt?" he asked softly. "Not anymore," Eliza said, her voice trembling. Only when people look at it with hate. I look at it with need," Kiyu said. He leaned in, He did not kiss her lips at first. He pressed his lips to her cheek, right on the thickest, most knotted part of the scar. Eliza gasped, a sound of shock and release. No one had ever touched her there with anything but a cloth or a medical instrument. To be kissed there on the very seat of her shame was an act of such profound acceptance that it broke her. Tears leaked from her eyes, hot and fast. Kiyu kissed the scar again, then moved to her temple, her eyelid, and finally, he found her mouth. The kiss was not frantic. It was slow, deep, and tasting of salt and promise. It was the kiss of two people who had run a marathon through fire and storm to find each other. Eliza reached up, her hands tangling in his long, black hair. She pulled him closer, needing to feel the solidity of him against her. She felt the beat of his heart against her chest, a steady rhythm that matched her own. For the first time in 5 years, Eliza did not feel like a collection of broken parts. She felt whole. She felt beautiful. Not because the scar was gone, but because it didn't matter. They broke the kiss but stayed close, foreheads resting together. "My treasure," Kiyu whispered against her lips. "My windbreak," she replied. They sat there for a long time as the stars came out, painting the Texas sky in a spray of diamonds. The town of Cedar Ledger flickered with lamplight in the distance, a small island of civilization in the vast ocean of the prairie. The danger of Crow was gone. The immediate fire was out. But the world was still a hard place. The winter would be cold. The drought would return. And the eyes of men would always be quick to judge what they did not understand. But as Eliza leaned her head on Kiyu's shoulder, watching the moon rise, she knew that the hardest battle, the battle against her own self-hatred, was won. "We have work to do tomorrow," she said softly. "Yes," Kiyu agreed. "But tonight, we rest." He wrapped his arm around her, drawing her into the shelter of his side, and in the silence of the plains, under the vast indifference of the stars. Two outcasts found the only home that mattered. The night deepened. The smoke from the burnt stable finally began to dissipate, carried away by the wind that swept down from the canyon, a wind that was no longer hunting, but singing. The months that followed the Great Fire of 1878 did not bring a miraculous transformation to Cedar Ledger. For the West was not a fairy tale written in ink, but a history carved in grit. The town did not suddenly become a paradise of tolerance, nor did the rains come and turn the dry prairie into a lush garden. The wind still blew, the dust still coated the tongue, and men still argued over the price of barbed wire and whiskey. But the silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of secrets kept in the dark, nor the silence of eyes looking away from a woman's face. It was the quiet of a community rebuilding itself, beam by beam, truth by truth. Eliza Mayhart sat in the corner of the newly refurbished trading post. It was no longer a dark spot where she hid to scrub floors. Mr. Henderson had cleared a space near the front window, the one that caught the best morning light, and set up a sturdy oak table. On the table sat a sewing basket, a bolt of blue calico, and a small sign hand-painted by the blacksmith E. Hart, Seamstress Repairs. Eliza threaded a needle with steady hands. The scar on her face was still there, a roadmap of past agony that pulled at her left eye and twisted her smile. But she no longer wore the deep bonnet that shadowed her features. She wore a simple ribbon in her hair, pulling it back from her face. "Is the hem straight, Miss Eliza?" Eliza looked up. Standing before her was Mrs. Gable, holding up a pair of trousers belonging to her husband. The woman looked tired, but her eyes were kind. "It looks true to me, Martha," Eliza said, her voice calm. "But tell Mr. Gable to stop carrying his wrench in the left pocket. It is wearing the fabric thin." Mrs. Gable laughed, a genuine sound. "I will tell him. And thank you, Eliza, for the extra stitching on Toby's coat. He says it is the warmest thing he owns." "He is a growing boy," Eliza replied. "He needs room to stretch." As Mrs. Gable left, the bell above the door chimed. It was not a customer. It was Ruth Pike. The old midwife hobbled in, leaning on her hickory cane. her face as wrinkled as a dried apple. "Get your kit, girl," Ruth barked, though there was no bite in her tone. "Young Sarah at the Miller homestead is early. Her water broke an hour ago. I need hands that don't shake, and my arthritis is acting up like a mule in a hailstorm." Eliza stood immediately, folding her work. This was her other life now. She was not a doctor, but under Ruth's tutelage. She was learning the art of bringing life into the world. The women of the town, once terrified that her cursed face would sour their milk, now found comfort in her presence. They learned that a woman who had survived fire knew how to guide them through the ring of fire that was childbirth. "I am ready," Eliza said, grabbing her medical bag, a gift from Sheriff Reed. They rode out to the Miller place in a buggy. The horizon was wide and empty, save for a single rider approaching from the north. Eliza's heart did a small, familiar leap. It was Kiyu. He was riding his paint horse, moving with the easy rhythm of the land. He did not dress like a cowboy. He wore his buckskins, his hair long and braided with silver, and he carried his rifle in a scabbard of beaded leather. He had not become civilized to suit the town. He remained Comanche. He slowed his horse as he passed the buggy. He did not stop, for there was work to be done. But he caught Eliza's eye. He nodded a sharp, single dip of his chin. Eliza nodded back, a smile touching her lips. They did not need words. In the months since the trial, Kiyu had carved out a unique place for himself. He was not of the town, but he was essential to it. He worked as a guide for the freight wagons that Sheriff Reed now monitored personally. He served as a translator when disputes arose between the ranchers and the wandering bands of his people. He was the bridge over troubled waters, walking a path that would have drowned a lesser man. "He is a good man," Ruth Pike grunted, watching Kiyu ride toward the canyon. "Stubborn as a rock, but good." "He is," Eliza agreed softly. "People still talk, you know," Ruth said, staring straight ahead. "They say it isn't right. A white woman and a savage. They say it won't last." "Let them talk," Eliza said, watching the dust kick up behind Kiyu's horse. "Their words are just wind. Wind passes. We stay." The birth was difficult. It took 10 hours of labor, 10 hours of sweat and blood and fear. But when the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of violet and orange, a cry pierced the air. Eliza held the slippery, squalling infant in her hands. It was a girl. She cleaned the baby and wrapped her in a soft flannel blanket, handing her to the exhausted mother. Later, as Eliza washed her hands in the basin outside the cabin, she saw a young girl sitting on the porch steps. It was the older sister of the newborn, a girl of perhaps 14 named Clara. Clara was crying silently, her shoulders shaking. Eliza dried her hands and sat down beside her. "Your sister is healthy. Clara, your mother is safe. It isn't that," Clara sniffed, wiping her nose on her sleeve. She looked at Eliza, then quickly looked away. "What is it then? The boys at the schoolhouse?" Clara whispered. "They called me a beanpole. They said I am too tall and my teeth are crooked. They said no one will ever want to court a girl who looks like a fence post." Eliza looked at the girl. She saw the fresh, stinging pain of youth, the belief that the world ended where the mirror began. Eliza reached out and gently turned Clara's face toward her. "Look at me, Clara," Eliza said. Clara hesitated, then looked. She looked at the shiny, rippled skin of Eliza's left cheek. She looked at the way the eye drooped. It was the face that had been called a monster, a witch, a curse. "Do you think I am beautiful?" Eliza asked. Clara stammered, her face flushing red. You are. You are nice. Miss Eliza." Eliza smiled, and for once, she did not try to hide the crookedness of it. "I am not beautiful. Clara, not by their rules. I never will be. But look at my hands." She held them up. "These hands just brought your sister into the world. These hands sew coats that keep children warm. These hands held a weapon to save a town." She leaned closer, her voice fierce and low. "You do not need to be beautiful to be alive. Clara, you do not need to be pretty to be worthy of love or respect. Beauty is just a currency, and it is a cheap one. It spends fast. Eliza touched the girl's shoulder. You are strong. You are smart. Do not let them tell you that you are nothing just because you do not look like a porcelain doll. You are iron, Clara, and iron lasts longer than paint. Clara stared at her, her eyes wide. The tears stopped. She nodded slowly. Go inside and see your sister, Eliza said gently. As the girl went inside, Eliza felt a lightness in her chest. The cycle of shame had to break somewhere. If she could be the stone that broke the wheel, then the fire had been worth it. 2 weeks later, the summer heat broke with a vengeance. It started with a drop in pressure that made the ears pop. The sky turned a sickly, bruised green. The birds stopped singing. Eliza was at the small cabin she had rented on the edge of town, a place of her own, with a porch that faced the open plains. She saw the wall of dust before she heard it. It was a towering tsunami of brown earth, stretching from the ground to the heavens, swallowing the sun. In the past, Eliza would have hidden under the bed. She would have packed her bag and run, convinced that the world was coming to finish the job the fire started. Today, she calmly walked to the windows. She closed the heavy wooden shutters and latched them tight. She soaked towels in water and jammed them into the cracks under the door. She lit the kerosene lamp on the table, creating a circle of warm, golden light against the encroaching dark. The door opened just as the wind hit. Kiyu stepped inside, the wind trying to tear the door from his grasp. He forced it shut, latching it against the howling fury outside. He was covered in a fine layer of silt. His eyes bright in the gloom. The storm is here, he said, wiping the dust from his face. Let it blow, Eliza said. She was standing by the stove, stirring a pot of stew. The roof is strong. Kiyu watched her. He unbuckled his gun belt and hung it by the door. He walked over to her, the floorboards creaking under his moccasins. The wind screamed outside, battering the walls with the sound of 1,000 angry ghosts. Sand hissed against the shutters, but inside, there was the smell of sage, stew, and safety. Kiyu stood behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. You are not afraid, he murmured. I have faced worse things than wind, Eliza said, leaning back into him. Kiyu turned her around. The lamplight cast deep shadows in the room, but it illuminated her face. He traced the line of her scar with his thumb, a gesture that had become their language. Do you remember what Crow said? Kiyu asked softly. That you were ugly, that you were something to be avoided. I remember, Eliza said. I remember what the town said, too. They were wrong, Kiyu said. His voice was rough with emotion. I have seen the great canyons of the north. I have seen the sun rise over the mountains of the cloud people. I have seen gold in the rivers. He looked deep into her eyes, stripping away the last remnants of her insecurity. But you are the only thing I have found that is real. Beauty fades with the season. Eliza, the frost kills the flower, but the rock remains. He kissed her forehead. You are my greatest treasure, he whispered, repeating the words he had shouted to the mob. But this time, they were not a weapon. They were a vow. Not because of your face, but because of what you did not let the fire take. You kept your soul. Eliza closed her eyes, letting the words settle into her bones. And you, she whispered back, are the only one who bothered to dig for it. The storm raged for 12 hours. When it passed, the world was buried in drift. But the cabin still stood, and the fire in the stove was still burning. They chose to marry at sunset, 3 days after the storm. It was not a traditional wedding. There was no white dress, for Eliza felt that white was a lie for a woman who had walked through smoke. She wore a dress of deep, rich indigo, the color of the twilight sky. They stood on the porch of the cabin. Sheriff Mason Reed stood before them, holding a Bible that he looked afraid to drop. Teal Moreno had returned from the south just in time, standing on one side with a grin that showed her gold tooth. Ruth Pike sat in a chair, thumping her cane on the floor to keep time to a rhythm only she heard. There were no long sermons. Kiyu, the sheriff began, clearing his throat. Take this woman, to be your wife, to protect her, and, well, stand by her. I choose her, Kiyu said. His voice was clear. He did not look at the sheriff. He looked at Eliza. I choose her before the sun and the moon. I choose her before my people and hers. She is my home. The sheriff blinked, a bit thrown off, then turned to Eliza. And you? Eliza. I choose him, Eliza said. I choose the man who sees. I promise to be the fire that warms, not the fire that burns. I promise to be the anchor. Well then, the sheriff said, closing the book, by the power of the territory, and by the power of common sense, I pronounce you man and wife. Kiyu did not wait for permission. He kissed her. It was a kiss of sealing, a kiss that tasted of the future. Teal cheered, a loud, whooping sound that echoed across the plains. Ruth Pike wiped a tear from her cheek and muttered, "About time." As the guests left, leaving the couple alone on the porch, the sun began to bleed into the horizon. The sky was a masterpiece of crimson and violet, vast and indifferent and beautiful. Eliza leaned her head on Kiyu's shoulder. They sat on a wooden bench he had built. From the town below, the faint sound of children playing carried on the breeze. It was the sound of the future, a future that would still be hard, still be dangerous, but a future that continued. They will still stare, Eliza said softly, watching the light fade. Let them stare, Kiyu said, his arm heavy and warm around her. They stare at the lightning too. It does not stop the storm. Eliza smiled. She touched the ring on her finger, a band of simple silver that Kiyu had hammered himself. She thought of the canvas bag that had once been her only possession. It was gone now. The ledger turned over to the federal marshals. She carried nothing but herself. I am not afraid of the staring anymore, she said. Good, Kiyu said, because we have a life to live, and it will take all our attention. Are we staying here forever? She asked. Forever is a long time for a scout. Kiyu replied, but we will stay until the wind changes, and when it changes, we will move together. Eliza looked out at the darkening prairie. The fear that had ruled her life, the fear of being seen, the fear of being known was gone. In its place was a quiet, unshakable dignity. She was Eliza May Hart. She was scarred, she was iron, and she was loved. The sun is down, she whispered. The stars are coming. Kiyu answered. Look, he pointed up. Above them, the first star of the evening pierced the indigo veil. It was sharp and bright. It is a guide, Kiyu said. No, Eliza said, taking his hand and placing it against her cheek, against the scar that was no longer a curse but a story. We are the guide. They sat in the silence. Two souls forged in fire and tempered by the wind, holding hands as the night rolled in over the Wild West. They were free, not because they were alone, but because they belonged to each other, by choice, by blood, and by the unyielding power of the truth, and that was enough. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a journey through the dust and fire of the American frontier, and I hope Eliza and Kiyu's story touched your heart as much as it did mine. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Are you driving through the city, relaxing at home, or maybe sitting on a porch watching your own sunset? Please leave a comment below and share your location and your thoughts on the ending. If you enjoyed this tale of resilience and love, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales. Don't forget to like this video and hit that hype button. It truly helps these stories reach more people and keeps the campfire burning. Until the next adventure, keep your powder dry and your eyes on the horizon. Goodbye.